themselves and their surroundings, better to turn through thought into action and shape their lives for the better. Sorry about that.
No worries.
So how are you doing today?
Alhamdulillah, I'm very well, I'm very well.
Alhamdulillah. So I think inshallah this is going to be a very exciting episode, and you're not, you're on TV all the time now. So why don't you tell us a bit about yourself and about your who you are and what you're going to tell us today?
Yeah, so obviously my name is Mohammed. As the bio suggested, I mean, I'm an aerospace engineer by day, so my job title is the Aerodrome Systems Specialist at Heathrow Airport. Basically, what that means is when you look out of a terminal building, all the systems that you see that allow an aeroplane to move around an airport, I'm the subject matter expert for them from a technical perspective. But today's really is taking it behind the curtains a little bit and actually showing some of the struggles that I had as a young person that maybe led me down that path, and specifically dyslexia as a struggle. And dyslexia is something that as a young person crippled me, but as I got older, I realized the power that dyslexia gave me that it didn't give to other people, and just that shift in perspective was really able to empower me. So I'd love to try and help any dyslexic people at home today really shift their perspective on what they see dyslexia as and how it impacts their day-to-day life.
For sure. I think that's very inspiring. And I think that's one of the biggest purposes of this show is to raise awareness about these conditions, but also to talk about them in an open way and to show the potential of the people behind them and not to be so isolated with a label sometimes. So why don't you tell us a little bit about how you were diagnosed with dyslexia and what were the signs or what was it like growing up essentially?
So I was diagnosed quite late in life. I was actually diagnosed at university.
Oh, wow.
So for a long time before then, I was just sort of struggling through it, picking and choosing my subjects just to avoid what I thought were weaknesses and try to use my strengths. But there was no labels with that. It was just I was just trying to avoid the things that I felt like I wasn't very good at. So an example of that is when I was in English. That was like a real. That's where it really came to life. My dyslexia would be in English, and the teacher would ask each person on the table to read one page of Wuthering Heights, the book that we were reading. It was like some old Shakespearean
Yeah.
type, like proper old school. And I'd try to read, but I'd see the words, but my mouth wouldn't be able to keep up with what I was seeing. So to the outsider who's watching it, it just looked like I had no idea how to read. So it's as if I like English was my second language, or as if English just wasn't a strong like it just you basically don't know how to read, and I'd stutter and I'd miss words and I'd repeat sentences and I'd miss lines, and it was a complete shambles. Like getting through one page of an English book was my biggest nightmare growing up, especially having to read out loud. And you can imagine you're 14, 15, 16, you're in a room full of your peers who, are all like hormonal teenage boys, and you're all
Yeah.
trying to like one up each other. And then there's you. You speak to them normally, and then you have to try and read a page of English, and you just sound like you're illiterate. And it was completely soul destroying in that moment because I'd hear them going, every time it was my go to read,
Oh,
and I'd see
wow.
them like roll their eyes, like, Mo, like, just come on, like, just read the page, like, stop stuttering, like, stop. And it was, and in your mind, you know how to read, but it's just the words aren't coming out the way you'd expect them to, and that was really tough. That
Mhm.
was really really tough, and I came up with little strategies to try and avoid reading the page. Like I'd time my toilet breaks
Wow.
to make sure that like I wasn't in the classroom when it was my go. So if it was the person to my right go and we were going this way, I'd make sure that by the time they were about quarter way through the page, raise my hand up, miss, can I go to the toilet?
Yeah.
Go to the toilet. By the time it was my go, I wasn't there, and they'd just skip me, and no one really noticed. So that became a little strategy, a little habit that I built. But yeah, I was trying to do everything I could just to survive and try and dodge the embarrassment and the shame that came along with what felt like not being able to read.
Wow, that must have been really tough for a teenager, and B, someone who's at school trying to prove themselves or trying to kind of be better or get good grades. And like you mentioned, you were okay talking to your peers. The moment you wanted to start reading, it was like nightmare. So
Exactly.
like that must have been very, very tough.
Mm.
We kind of skipped a little bit at the beginning where for the viewers and the listeners that might not know, what is dyslexia
Yeah.
and what is dyslexia to you?
I mean, to me, so dyslexia, I don't know what the dictionary definition of dyslexia is, and maybe I should have done a bit of research before I came about the dictionary definition. But to me, dyslexia is a difficulty in being able to see, like it's like there's a miscommunication between your ears and your mouth and your eyes and what you see. It's like sometimes things just miss each other. That's how I really envision it. It's, for example, let's say you tell me to remember a long code of numbers. So it goes 64783 2. Then you to ask me to repeat that back to you, and I'd go 64738 2, and I'd just, my brain would go, take this from here, put it there, put that there, and it's just, your brain some picks and chooses what information it sees, and then it presents it back to you as if it was facts, like that. So that's why, like, when I'd read, like, I'd look at a word, and I'd see the word, and I'd see how the letters are arranged in that word, but my mouth would look at it and be confused as to how to pronounce that word. So I wouldn't be able to pronounce it in the way that I know it should be pronounced, and I just get that wrong. Sometimes you'd skip words, so your brain just sort of skips words along. I really think it's just a different way that your brain is wired. Like, the way I now understand it is that my brain is just wired differently, and I'm able to connect dots with things that people don't see. Subhanallah, I've actually shifted the way I view dyslexia completely. And now, when you ask me to define it in my brain, I'm only thinking about the positives.
Yeah.
Like, I've completely forgotten what the negative things of dyslexia are. The way I would describe dyslexia now, you genuinely look at the world in a way where you're able to connect dots, you're able to think about problems in a completely different, unique way. You're able to link things that seem completely unrelated in a way that people wouldn't have thought about before, and solve problems in ways that people wouldn't have thought about before. It's just, you tend to have a different perspective on the things that we look at in the world than everyone else. You just think about the world differently.
Yeah.
But yeah, that definition doesn't really talk about the struggle that comes along with it. That's how I choose to view it now.
Yeah. Wow. So it's basically just saying if the world was a box,
Yeah.
you think about it from different angle, essentially.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. And like, my favorite analogy is the one of like the mug, where if I was to present it to you like this, it just looks like a square,
Yeah.
right? But then if I do that,
Turn it.
you realize it's more than that. And if I do this, you realize it's just a circle. So I feel like a dyslexic person is able to look at a thing and be like, see it from more than one perspective in a way that other people may not have been able to. That's how I see it now.
That's a very positive outlook.
Yeah.
It's a very positive outlook.
To rewrite it.
And I'm really glad for you, for your sake, that you were able to kind of identify that you were seeing things differently and you knew there was something wrong. But I can imagine that while you were at school, you probably hadn't, figured that out just yet. You were probably thinking, why am I like this? And why is nobody pointing out that I'm very different? And I think a lot of people might, grow into that thought, and maybe that's what makes people feel very isolated. And alhamdulillah, for you and your sake, you were able to fulfill your potential, and you went on to go to university and you studied engineering, which, mashallah, very successful in that. Did you ever think while you were at school that you couldn't get to university, or you couldn't make the grades, or there was something wrong?
I definitely thought there was something wrong with like my reading ability. And what that done is it completely put me off anything to do with English. So I wrote that off as any future career of mine. I wrote off English from the outset. Like, anything to do with writing essays or reading books, completely written it off. Because I felt like that just wasn't what I was good at all. So that knock of confidence of like the people sniggering or the people laughing just completely set me back and told me, yeah, don't do anything to do with that. Go focus on the maths and the sciences. And that's kind of what steered my ship, I guess. Yeah, that's really how that's the effect of it. At then it was less of I can't do anything, I can't fulfill my potential, but it was like, okay, I need to really pick and choose and be smart about where I focus my energy, because otherwise this could be really, like, I can spend all my time, and I spent so much time trying to improve my reading, and it just wasn't. It's like wheel spinning, it just wasn't going anywhere. But alhamdulillah, I kind of was like, okay, let me shift my focus to like the things that I am good at, rather than just focusing on the things that I am bad at. And that was a real moment, because instantly you disengage how much control that thing has on you. It's like, okay, it's not controlling me anymore. I'm focusing on other things. I know those are my strengths and these are my weaknesses. Let me focus on my strengths rather than just try and make my weaknesses mediocre. Like, I knew I'd never be able to read as fast as the other kids in class. Maybe I could have. Maybe I could. But I thought, okay, I can either sit here, spend all that time trying to become mediocre at reading English, or I can put that time and effort towards becoming the best at maths. And I just chose that instead.
Yeah, it's very smart to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when did you get your diagnosis and how?
So I tried to get my diagnosis at college, but I was dismissed. They were
Mm.
like, "No, we don't think you're dyslexic." And like, I couldn't see how the woman came to that conclusion. Like, I literally ticked all the boxes. She was like, "Nah, we don't think you have dyslexia." So I was dismissed second year college, and then when I went to university in my first year, I went to them and I was like, "Listen, I really think I'm dyslexic." It was because after the first year of college, one of my teachers was like, I think you should go for a dyslexia test. It was actually one of my maths teachers. He saw me getting loads of numbers muddled up always.
Mm.
So like, I just muddle up my numbers and he'll be like, why don't you, because he'd read out the question and I'd just write down a different
The wrong
thing.
number.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like he'd say 86 and I'd write 68 and I wouldn't see it. Or like when I was in my driving test, my driving instructor would tell me to turn left and I'd turn right.
Yeah.
Almost hitting the car next to me. But it was just like my brain would hear left and my mind would go right. And it's just like a mismatch. It was just a complete mismatch of like information in my brain. It wasn't until second year or first year of university where I was like, okay, I need to try this. I need to try and get a diagnosis again. So I went to the center at university. Every university has a disability center. You can go there and get yourself tested. They'd done a preliminary test just to sort of, just as a litmus test to see what was going on. And they were like, okay, it seems like you have all the right symptoms. We're going to enroll you in and actually get a proper diagnosis done. And that's when I done the proper diagnosis and the results came back. Yeah, you have quite strong dyslexia. I was like,
How did you feel when you got the diagnosis?
I was like, yeah, I knew that. I was like, okay, thanks. Like, tell me something that I don't know. But it was a relief. Like, it was a relief because it's like, okay, so I'm not just dumb. I'm not just illiterate. I can't just read English as I had assumed based upon the reaction of my peers. Okay, like, there's an explanation for this. And actually, I think one thing that was really quite powerful is that when the woman was explaining to me my dyslexia, she highlighted on some strengths of people that had dyslexia. So she actually went through and said, these are some things that actually you'll find quite easy, you'll find quite good. And it was like pattern recognition and stuff like that. She's like, you'll breeze through all of this stuff. It's just this part is what you're not good at. And I was like, okay. And it's like, finally someone gets me.
Yeah.
Finally I feel understood. Finally I feel like I'm not alone. I feel like, wow, like everything you're saying is like my childhood incarnated. Like, you're going to be bad at this, you're going to be bad at this. Like, even I remember when she told me, she said that your hand-eye coordination might not be as good. And I remember in that moment, my mind like just completely like just went straight back to a moment when I was in like secondary school where I was a goalkeeper and I went to go save a goal,
Yeah.
thinking that the ball was there and I just completely missed.
Oh.
And I was like, I could have sworn I was gonna catch the ball, or like the ball would come to me nice and slowly, and I'd go to catch it, and it just split straight through my hands, and it would go into the back of the net, and
wow.
like so much embarrassment. And she was like to me, 5 years later, she was like, yeah, your hand-eye coordination might be off a little bit sometimes, and you're like, oh my god, like
It makes sense.
it makes sense. Like, I could have sworn I was gonna catch that ball, and it went straight through my hands. It makes sense. So you really feel understood in those moments, which I think is really powerful.
Wow. I think that's such a new perspective, you know. Usually on the show, when we ask people about when they receive their diagnosis, everyone says it's a relief because it's a lead up, kind of, because everyone lives through this life where they're like, something's wrong. I need someone to tell me it's wrong. But to think that you're now like giving yourself like reasons for things that you once, you know, pointed out as like, why did I do this? How could I have done this? Is there something wrong? And now you're getting an answer for all of those things. I can understand how relieving that is. But did you ever feel like this diagnosis was something that you had to prove to yourself or prove to others?
What do you mean?
In the sense that you, growing up, did you ever think, like, I'm a little bit different to these other people in my class, you know, and there's a reason for that, and I need to prove that there's a reason for that?
I never really felt like that, to be honest. No. I wouldn't say I had like I needed to prove to them. At the time, I mean, I heard that you get extra time in the exam and stuff, and I was like, all right, like that was the biggest thing. I was like, oh my God, I'm so happy. So it wasn't necessarily like proving to others. It was more like, I guess I was focusing on what good was to come out of this diagnosis rather than
Yeah,
trying to prove to people in the past.
fairs, fairs. How open were you about it at the time?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, very open. I'm with my closest friends in uni. I was very open to them about it. And actually, I got one of them to go and check himself as well. And it turns out he was dyslexic because
Oh, wow.
I went and explained to him my symptoms, and he was like, "What? You've been through that too?" And I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "Oh my god," because I mean, in engineering, you'll actually find that like a larger percentage of engineers are dyslexic than others, just because that tendency of moving away from English and going towards maths sort
Mhm.
of really shuffles the scales in terms of how many dyslexic people choose engineering. So when I was talking to one of two friends in engineering that were with me in the course, turns out one of them was also dyslexic. So when he got his diagnosis, he was like just as relieved. Um, but yeah, I was very open about it. I didn't really have anything to hide at that point. I was like, this is what it is, and actually, I feel relieved about it. So now at least I can have a reason, have like
Yeah,
a little excuse if I'm misspelling stuff, and I can be like, well,
because I'm
it's
dyslexic.
because I'm dyslexic. Leave me alone. I was
Yeah,
trying to find like a email, those email, those things you put at the bottom of an email,
yeah, yeah.
like something about like if you find a spelling
Disclaimer.
mistake, it's dyslexia, not me. Yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. I think that's very useful sometimes. Put that disclaimer. Um, so what was the support like then from your family, friends, or was it just like, oh, okay, yeah, you've got dyslexia, next day?
Um, I don't know if in those circles it was as important. Like if it bared as much like weight. I think in the academic world, it's much more significant. I mean, my mom tells me she's dyslexic. She's never had an actual
Yeah,
diagnosis, but a lot of the symptoms that I shared with her, she's like, yeah, I'm
me
I'm
too.
dyslexic. Yeah, me too, literally, me too. So my mom was like, yes, team dyslexia, go. Like, she was like, great, I think I'm dyslexic too, and it kind of makes sense because she's super creative and like she loves problem solving as well. So I can see where I get that from her.
Inshallah.
Um, but yeah, my dad was just like, yeah, I mean, I like my dad. He's just gonna be like, yeah, okay. Um, and then yeah, like I think it was mainly the support I got from university. So for those of you who don't know, like if the amount of support you get for being dyslexic at university is they'll give you a laptop, like a free laptop on the house.
Oh,
They will
wow.
give you a printer. They will give you like these colored sheets that you can put in front of like writing, and it's amazing. Like one little colored filter on a page completely changes how the comprehension of the information, and it makes it so much easier to read. Sometimes the white on the black, that contrast just doesn't help neurodivergent people. So just adding a filter on it, either yellow or green, just makes it instantly easier to read. They give you a bunch of that. They give you printing credits. The reason why is because reading from a screen can become quite disorientating. So rather, when you print it out and you can read it from a piece of paper with that filter, instantly becomes a lot easier. So there's so much help that you can get for being dyslexic, being diagnosed with dyslexia from the university itself. If you do feel like you're struggling, instantly, especially like the academic game,
Hmm.
just becomes so much more manageable. Because without dyslexia, I remember doing my GCSEs, doing my A levels, without extra time, I was running out of time every time. And it was because the chunk of text would take me 3 times as long to read than everyone else. Like
Hmm.
the page where you had to actually get all the understanding of the context of the question, I'd be sat there reading it for like 15 minutes, and the person next to me was done it in 5. So that 10 extra minutes that I get at the end is because it genuinely takes me so much longer to dissect that bit of information and while I'm stuttering through it.
Mm. So the majority of your support when it came to your diagnosis was actually just academic support, and that's what you needed at the time, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And it's what helped you flourish, would you say?
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So you get 25% extra time in all the exams. You get the laptop, you get the printer so that you can print things out and actually do all your notes in advance. Even lecturers need to send you notes afterwards, like in advance. So they'd send you all their presentations in advance so that you can print them out and follow along. There's like a whole guideline from the university of like,
Wow.
now that you're dyslexic, these are the things that you should be aware of. This you'll find this difficult. It'll be easier if you do this. You'll find this difficult. It'll be easier if you do this. Here's all the tools that you need. You get a grant to go along with it to buy all the stuff. So yeah, it really does unlock a real a real like flood of help
Yeah.
that you've just been desperate for the years before, and you hadn't had received any of it.
Yeah, wow. That's actually opened my eyes a lot now, because I think a lot of people will sit there and be like, I might be dyslexic, but what's the point of getting a diagnosis? Or what's the point of getting tested? Yeah, I'm dyslexic. Okay,
Yeah.
that's fine. Um, but actually, these institutions are there, they help you.
Yeah.
And they're especially universities, they're there to support their students flourish. And a lot of people will just be like, I don't want to be called dyslexic, or I don't want that label. Okay, yeah, I find reading hard. Okay, yeah, but so does the average Joe sometimes as well. um, but would you encourage people that think I might be a little bit dyslexic to get tested anyways?
You'd lose nothing.
Mm.
If anything, it will be able to, like, if you are dyslexic, congratulations, you just unlocked like a superpower. Like, you now think about the world different to 99.999% of the world,
Hmm.
and that's where innovation is born. So congratulations, like, you literally got something so unique that's going to help you. So if anything, the positive confirmation of that is worthwhile seeking, but also it can give you an understanding of yourself and a self-awareness that means that you're not kicking yourself every time you get something simple wrong, thinking there's something wrong with you.
Hmm.
And it really is the most simple things, like mixing up your lefts and your rights, repeating a number back wrong completely. They seem so subtle, but sometimes you really kick yourself thinking, why am I so dumb? Like, how did I get that wrong? Like, how did I get my left and my right wrong? And now I feel like an embarrassment in front of everyone, as if I don't know the difference between left and right. These little things, if you have the diagnosis, you can be like, it's okay. Like, I'm dyslexic, it's fine. But yeah, it is what it is. And actually, you unlock the positive side as well, as I mentioned.
Yeah. So inshallah, if the viewers and listeners, one of them is listening out there, just think, oh, I'm going to get tested, and then they get to kind of flourish at their university. Because I do believe that having all this support, and even having the knowledge of just I might be dyslexic, and yes, I am dyslexic, it's a difference between a high grade and a low grade.
Mm,
It's a difference between an opportunity, an internship, and a not. It's a difference
exactly.
between the way that your professors see you or your lecturers see you versus not. And it's all just because of, sometimes people want to run away from a diagnosis or run away from the taboo and the preconceptions associated to that kind of label of being neurodivergent and what it means after that.
Yeah.
Did you ever have to battle any of those kind of preconceptions or taboos yourself?
So after I was diagnosed, I tended to be the one bringing up the fact that I'm dyslexic
Mm.
on the forefront. So I was very like upfront and open about it. So another thing to bear in mind is even job interviews, in like those assessment, like online assessment exams, jobs will give you 25% extra time for each of those. So for somebody who's in their third year thinking, I'm not gonna, that's it, my academic life is
Yeah.
over. Moving forward, if you ever have an online assessment for a graduate scheme, they'll give you extra time. To answer your question about like, did I ever face like the sort of the pushback, I guess, from it, I'd always be the one bringing it up first, and I'd always talk about it in a way that was positive. So I wouldn't give the person on the other side a chance to like slander me with it. You know what I
Mm.
mean? Like, I'd always be on the forefront, and I'd always pitch it in a positive way so that they never had a chance to try and use it against me. So yeah, I guess that move is like checkmate. You can't. I've disarmed you. I've just used everything that you
Yeah.
know. It's like say something that I didn't know. you know. So yeah, that was my tactic. Like it still is.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, good on you. And I think that's what more people need to have, is that kind of that positive outlook of not to be scared from kind of people, that might throw, oh, you're dyslexic. Okay, never mind. Then we'll give this to somebody else. Where I
Mm.
think most people, or in the job sector, I think in the educational sector, they're not like that. I think they're much more open-minded. But not all institutions are very accessible in that way. I think universities have gone far because they're
Yeah.
very well established, and
Yeah.
they're very politically correct, and they love to help, and they have like the whole disability center, like you said, they have a well-being center. But not all institutions are like that. And I can kind of vouch, and we've spoken about this from with previous guests that on the show, that institutions like, for example, madrasas, Arabic schools, um, kind of even just like mosques, youth centers, they're not very accessible in that way. And I think in your experience, did you go to an Arabic school or a madrasa, and did you ever find it difficult then, maybe reading Quran or Arabic? I mean,
Yeah.
I went to an Arabic school myself, and Arabic is hard for anybody.
Yeah.
So, what was it like then?
It- Now that you've mentioned it, it's like there were two separate worlds, really. Like the life that I guess you live in, like the Western like side where you're in English school and stuff, it was like completely detached from your experience in Arabic school. Like I've
Yeah,
never even considered trying to get dyslexic help in an Arabic school environment. It's like it doesn't
yeah,
even cross your mind because there's so many more other things that you feel like need to get done before they get to that stage. But I guess that's a wrong way to think about it. Like we should be addressing all the issues simultaneously rather than have to wait. Yeah, like you said, Arabic is like hard enough for anyone. And I think one thing that adds even more challenge to Arabic is that there are all these like harakat, so you have the thing on
yeah,
top and the thing on the bottom. So imagine if I'm trying to read like an 8 letter word in English and I'm struggling to try and get my head around it. Imagine an 8 letter word in Arabic, and on top of that, all the little acts,
yeah.
shadda, dhamma, like all these other
Symbols,
bits
yeah,
as well, all these symbols. It just made it 10 times harder. And I would never understand how people were reading Arabic and then just swiftly moving on to the other word, because it would take me long enough to figure out how to pronounce one word to then have to look and try and figure out how to pronounce the other word and then pronounce it. I'd tackle them one at a time. But people are able to just sort of weave their way through an Arabic sentence. I remember looking at them when I'm young. I'm like, no idea how you're doing that. Can't do that. And
yeah.
then
Arabic's not for me.
they're getting all the harakat right. Yeah, it was a write off for me. I, I completely remember vividly. I told myself Arabic is like 10 times harder than English to read. So yeah, I'm gonna try my best, but do not ask me to read out loud.
Yeah,
I remember like, yeah, I don't think I was ever asked to read out loud in Arabic school. Thank God. So yeah,
yeah.
lucky with that
Because
one.
I can imagine as well, because Arabic is the opposite way of how English is written,
Mm,
right? Is it right to left,
yep.
right?
Well,
Left to
whichever one.
right? The
Yeah,
other
one
way.
goes this way, one goes that way.
Exactly. So I can imagine that's because I yesterday I was helping my niece with her homework, and I started writing Arabic on the wrong side, and she was like, "Amma, it's the wrong side," and I was like, "Oh my God." So I can only imagine how like difficult it is for people with dyslexia, because it's literally A, switching languages,
Mm,
B, like you mentioned, the symbols, and it's on technically the wrong side.
yeah.
Um, but what can our institutions do you think? Because it's not, it's an unfair kind of situation to be in, where we're now, everyone should be able to be taught Arabic,
Mm,
because it's the language of the Quran.
mm.
Even if it's not your, because you're an Arab and you want to learn the language of your kind of traditions, but it's the language of the Quran. So what can our institutions do to make it more accessible and to make it more kind of forward for people that are neurodivergent or dyslexic in your case, do you think?
I think there are like some very simple things. Sometimes even the font that Arabic is written in can make a world of a difference on how easy it is to read. So simple things like making the font different, putting the harakat in a different color in certain textbooks, so you can read. You can buy like some Qurans where the font is nice and clear. The harakat are different colors. That just make it so much more easier to read. I think from an institutional perspective, just recognizing dyslexia as something. So even if they're not the ones that are going and taking people to do the tests, if somebody does have a test, then allow them to demonstrate it. And if they have an exam at the end of the year, give them that 25% extra time and just mirror what you would find in the Western world from a dyslexic perspective, because they're a few steps ahead, and just mirror that. It's not rocket science. Just see what support they're giving and see if we can support that on the other side. There's other things that sort of they gave me when I was in university. Like they'd give me there's a it's crazy to think that it was an entire program before. Now it just happens easily. There was something called Dragon on a laptop, which is where you dictate what you want to say, and it types it out.
Okay, yeah.
Now you literally,
Dictation.
literally, what like literally your keyboard has got one right there. But before it was a whole program where dictation was a thing. Now, I guess just giving people the option of like dictating what they need to say helps. Before it wasn't a thing. Now it's easier, so it's not like somebody have to do anything. Well, what I'd say is if you are dyslexic, just use the dictate function on your phone more. It'll just make your life easier. The amount of times I've sat there not knowing how to spell something, and I'm just like, it's just like for the simplest word, dictate. I let it do all the hard work for me. So more advice for any dyslexic people: just use the tools that you have available to you. Like you don't have to live in the struggle. We're living in an age where things are at our fingertips and we can use them. Um, and yeah, I guess that goes for both ways. Is to get the institutions to encourage the use of the tools, and also get the people to use the tools and not feel like, oh no, I have to just struggle through this.
Yeah. I think that's sometimes the problem in mindset, especially from like from the example the community that I come from or we come from, is with parents, they might not be able to guide their children. They might have figured out there's something wrong. They might have figured out they might be a bit dyslexic, but now, okay, fine, my child's dyslexic. How can I help my child? And it's
Mm,
actually, for example, Iraqi parents that might not have language as a strong point, um, you know, educational centers, schools might tell their parents they can do this, 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 but it's now communicating it to the student itself, or themselves, to kind of push, or for parents to not worry about their child in that
mm.
aspect either. So sometimes it's just education. And it's about telling people, and that's why we're doing this show. It's about telling people these tools exist. I didn't even know about half these tools. I didn't know the filter thing made a big difference.
It does.
Yeah,
It does. I still got all the filters at home from like 6 years ago at
from
uni.
uni.
Yeah, yeah. And they all make a big difference. And I think the biggest mindset shift that really needs to happen is for that just focus on the things that you are good at. Because trust me, yes, dyslexia may make you not as good as at a few things, but the plethora of things that it makes you unbelievably good at are so easy to leverage. And like me as an engineer, throughout my career, I've designed a few things in every place that I'd go. I'd always look at it and I'd be like, "There's an easier way to do this." And I'd go off and I'd like sketch something out and I'd design it and I'd build it. So I used to work at a company called Lufthansa, which was in Hayes, and we used to overhaul landing gears for aeroplanes. So the Boeing 737, I designed the jig that would hold it in a completely unique way to anything else that was on the shop floor. For the first time ever, we had like a jig that would hold the landing gear from within rather than holding it from outside, and that completely helped the operational team in a way that they'd never seen before. So
Wow.
that was one thing. The other thing is when I was in Heathrow Airport, I'd redesigned the sort of the baggage part of the baggage system, and it was a very small tweak that no one really had noticed, but I noticed just because my brain is wired a little bit differently. I thought, well, if we make that change, we can increase the efficiency of our system by over 60, 70%. And I made that change. And again, these are things that people had been walking past for years. But a dyslexic brain is able to look at something and be like, there's something that we can do here. There's that I can see something that other people can't. Use that. Like that's a superpower. Like that's perspective. Perspective is a superpower. So for anyone who's dyslexic, yes, it might take you 2 times as long to read a sentence, but you can literally look at the world in a different way. That's power. That's true power. So learn to really embrace that and to lean into that. Because if you lean into that, you never know what you might be able to see in the world and change in the world. They'll make it 100 times better than the way you found it.
Sure. Wow. Powerful words, honestly. And very, very, very inspiring. And I think it's something that everyone that, being dyslexic or not dyslexic needs to hear sometimes, because it's knowing your strengths is a power in itself. And if you use something that you once thought was a weakness to now be your strength, like in your case, your dyslexia was your weakness in school, right?
Yeah.
I'm assuming in GCSEs, like you mentioned, and even in A levels, where you thought couldn't read, and so that was a weakness. But now it's helped you excel so much at work, at university, in kind of your career, because of this strength that you now see as a strength. So inshallah, all the viewers and the listeners that are hearing this as well, that might be going through something similar, it kind of inspires them to be like, no, actually, yeah, I've got so much potential. I need to fulfill that,
Yeah.
which sometimes is the difference.
Mm.
A lot of we talk about disabilities and special needs on this program, and inclusion and accessibility, but sometimes it's understanding what it means to them. What does the disability mean to them? What is disability in your case, your dyslexia? What does it mean to you? And how can you now drive that forward and be the person you knew you were meant to be, or fulfill that potential, regardless of what the world tells you about disabilities and special needs. And inshallah, that's what this show is trying to accomplish in that aspect. So if you could look back at time, what would you tell your younger self? Even though you'll probably tell
Yeah,
them exactly what you just said now, but
yeah, just don't worry.
yeah.
Like, don't worry about it. They'll laugh, but one day they'll come and they'll say, "Man, sorry, sorry about that. We were just." One thing I guess that young people need to realize is that all the people that are maybe bullying them, all the people that may be laughing at them, there will come a time where those people will be wiser and older, and you'll be friends, and you'll be back. Like, you won't see them in that way anymore. You won't see yourself in that way anymore. Um, but the main two things, other than it's all going to be okay, there's two main things that I'd love to tell a younger version of myself, is that number one, you have the ability to change who you are, and that's a very freeing and empowering statement, in my opinion, because when I was in that age, I did not like who I was. I didn't like the fact that I wasn't what I thought wasn't I was meant to be. I didn't like the fact that I wasn't as cool as the cool kids, right? But the fact is that who you are when you are 15 or 16 years old does not correlate to who you're going to be in the future, and that's a very freeing thing to realize. It completely breaks the shackles of your childhood and says, wow, I can invent myself. I can reinvent who I want to be for the future. I guess that's really the core of the message, is that, listen, you can be whoever you want to be. And the other thing I'd say is, in that process of really changing who you are, stop focusing on the things that you're not good at. The key in life is to choose the 2, 3 things that you're really good at, bring those together and find your niche. Don't try and be what the other person's good at. Be what you're good at. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has built us of all these different puzzle pieces, like a bit of dyslexia, a bit of engineering, a bit of not knowing how to read, a bit of all these little things He's put us together, and it's a masterpiece. But unless you realize how that masterpiece fits into the rest of the bigger puzzle of the world, if you're trying to stuff it into this other part of the world that wasn't meant for it, you'll feel like you're not worthy of anything. But the reality is you're a perfect puzzle piece that's meant to fit into this part of the world. So step one is understand yourself, have that self-awareness of who you are and what you're good at, and then go find how that thing that you're good at is going to impact the world in this place and not in this place. See where you fit in the world with your strengths and go and make a difference in that place. And don't worry about your weaknesses.
Wow, that's really, 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 powerful words, inspiring words, and inshallah, the viewers and the listeners here are inspired by that.
Inshallah.
That's the whole purpose of the show. So, alhamdulillah, very grateful to have you here.
I'm grateful to be here.
In your experience, and I'm assuming because follow you on Instagram and we see your work with the youth in general, in your experience, have you ever come across the younger kind of generation or youth in general that might be from a neurodivergent background or from a background of disability and require some sort of special needs? Do you ever come across them, and do they ever kind of ask for your help in some way, or do you feel like there's a big problem in our community in supporting them?
Is there a problem? Yes. Especially in our community. I think we rely on external forces to help them out more than the community comes together to help them out. I think from the smallest things of the fact that most of our mosques aren't even accessible. Like, think about a young person who might be 25 years old in a wheelchair, not being able to access a mosque. What does that tell you? What does that person feel about the community, about their religion potentially? Because they feel like the house of God, right? The mosque, I can't even access. Like, that sends massive signals. So before they even come to me, we need to make sure that the most simple things, the physical structures, are there. Then we can start tackling the mindset of the people around them, how people view them, how people talk to them, what sort of language do the people use when they're referencing them. Is it cans or is it can'ts? Is it do's or is it don'ts? Like, we really need to shift that. I mean, for me, I haven't really had a young person who's neurodivergent come up to me to say this, but I guess growing up in a household where my father is wheelchair bound, like, I don't see disability as a problem
Hmm.
ever. I've lived with it. It's part of my day to day life. So when I see somebody who's in a wheelchair, not once do I ever think, oh my God, poor things. Like, yo, you live your life like everyone else lives your life. Like, let's make it happen. How can we make this happen? Like, you know, you've got potential, you've got power, and it really empowers you to see all those people online that are like, you know, just no limbs, and like
Yeah.
that guy, I think it's Nicholas, his name, where he's just got like a little drumstick, and he's like a motivational speaker. Like all he has is like a body and just a little tiny little bit of like meat, like
Oh,
just
wow.
like little bone just that sticks out of the side of his body here, and he uses it to like drive around in his wheelchair. He's a motivational speaker, travels the world, goes swimming, got a wife and kids, like lives a full life. And I think there might not be those examples yet in our community, but we need the people in our community to see that, and then we need to build the environment around them to make them be that example, to really give them that push to say, yo, go out there, make it happen, um, go live the life that you really want. There's one thing that I'm planning to do, inshallah, in the future. I don't want to say too much about it because I don't want to ruin the surprise, but there are two individuals who are wheelchair bound in our community, and I actually want to give a shout out to an organization called Airability. Now, Airability is a charity that has a few planes that are completely accessible for people of all disabilities. So this is an aircraft that you can lift up the person who's in a disability and put them in the captain's seat, and they can
Wow.
fly the plane. So inshallah, in the coming months, over the next year, the weather was really bad this winter. I planned to do it this winter. We didn't manage to do it. Inshallah, in the coming months, I'll be taking two people from our community on this experience. The
Wow.
motto of this organization, Our Ability, is that if you can see yourself flying a plane, what can't you do? If you're in a wheelchair your whole life and people say, "Oh, you can't do this and you can't do that," and then next thing you know, you're literally in the captain's seat with the headset on, going meow, and you're flying this plane. Instantly, that body believes, "Hold on a minute, I just flew a plane. I can do anything."
Yeah.
And I'd love to give that experience to two people
Yeah.
from our community, inshallah.
Inshallah. Um, I think that's fantastic. And it all drills down to your whole kind of scope of the mindset,
Mm.
right? It's all in the mindset. Um, and like you mentioned, there is a problem in our community, and we talk about this problem all the time on the show. And sometimes I think, where is it, and how could, because I speak to loads of people as guests, and everyone's like, we need to be more inclusive, more accessible, and everyone I speak to seems to be more inclusive and accessible, and everyone's very open-minded and so, but then there is still a problem in our community. Now, how do we address that? How do we move forward? And your Airability is one of the ways, right? It's supporting these individuals, and not just supporting them, by the way. This is a way of showing the world that they are capable.
Exactly.
Being disabled doesn't mean you're not capable. It's just you might be able-bodied or you might be disabled, but it doesn't mean you're not capable. And I think showing the world that has a really big impact alongside the impact on the individual themselves.
100%.
What do you think kind of are like the number one things that you, as somebody who you've just mentioned being a family member of someone who's wheelchair bound, what can our community do better? Or what do you think people in our community that attend these kind of gatherings like majalis or mosque or prayer, how would you like to see their mindsets different towards disability?
That's such a good question. That's such a good question. And I think it's hard to like paint everyone with the same brush, because I think every single person will have certain things that they need to tweak in the way that they view disabled people, and as a collective, then the wave will change, like the tide will change. But I also think that there's something that we need to do where we need to speak on behalf of the disabled person, because sometimes the disabled person doesn't feel like they have the confidence to ask for what they need, so they will stay silent. And this is like something that I need to do more of, even myself. Like, I've known for the longest time that there's a very prominent mosque in our community that a couple of years ago decided to remove the handrails to go up the stairs. And for them, it was an aesthetic thing. The stairs look nicer without the handrails. Not realizing that there was people who relied on those handrails to go up the stairs. And in Arabic, they say, Yawmu Layla, overnight, that mosque was no longer accessible to them. Until this day, that mosque doesn't even have a ramp to go up it, even if it's one of the foundational mosques in the society. Now, the issue isn't necessarily the mosque. The issue is that I haven't even gone up to management of that mosque saying, I demand a ramp.
Mm-hmm.
We need this. So I know that the person who's disabled won't even take that step and say, we need this, it's not upon the disabled person to go ask. It's upon the people who are around that disabled person to say, yo, they need this. And we need to be like before, like 2 steps ahead of that disabled person, thinking, what else do they need? What else do they need? So, for example, one thing that I've loved seeing is that there's so many more lectures these days with a translator, like with a
Yeah,
sign language
BSL,
translator
yeah.
on the side. That's amazing. That's amazing. Like I even went to give a talk at British Airways the other day, and they had a woman live who was like listening to my speech and then translating it because there was one person in the crowd who was hard of hearing. And I walked into ASDA yesterday, last night, and there was somebody on the screen like doing British Sign Language, and I thought, wow, that's fantastic. And clearly, that it's not somebody who's deaf asking for all this stuff to be done. It's somebody speaking on behalf of that person because they understand the challenges and says we need to do this for that person. So I think that that's the beauty of, I guess, Amanati, right? Is that the person who done that or like started that organization isn't disabled themselves, but they're speaking on behalf of the disabled person. We need to promote that. It's not just about let's promote the people with disabilities. It's actually let's realize that we have a responsibility to speak on their behalf and to stand in force when they might not have a voice. And I guess that's what I need to start doing more myself. Learn about all these disabilities, what challenges they come with, and then go and put your voice down, even when it's not even about you. Like take your ego out of it. It's not about you. You need to speak on behalf of the people that need it the most.
100%. I 100% agree with you. And I think this is really nice to hear because we've yet to hear something like that as well. And it's all about being proactive in our communities. It's all well and good to say or acknowledge there is a problem. We all know there's a problem. There's a lot of problems, a lot in our communities and even in the wider society, looking left, right, and center, this world is full of problems. But it's being proactive and having that kind of confidence to be like, hold on, for my brothers and sisters, there needs to be change. If it's not going to directly affect me, maybe one day it will, maybe it won't. Yet for my brothers and sisters, and I think that's the whole idea of Islam, isn't it? It's about being that one Muslim ummah. It's about looking left and right and being like, my brothers, my sisters, we need to help them, we need to support them, we need this, we need this, we need them to feel included because that's what Islam came to do, right? It came to teach us to help one another before we help ourselves even.
Yeah.
And one of the things in our community that I've noticed is that we don't. We don't help, or we do help in a way that we help ourselves as well sometimes. And so it's about being proactive. It's about speaking up. It's about if you have that kind of light bulb moment of, because sometimes it is a light bulb moment, and sometimes even I think of it like, because alhamdulillah, I've not been directly affected by disability in any way, so I don't see the struggle, on my kind of day-to-day basis. But sometimes I'm sitting in a lecture and I think, hold on a minute, shouldn't there be something like BSL interpretation for this? And it's having that light bulb moment and thinking, what I'm going to do with this light bulb moment, I'm going to speak to someone.
Rather than just, oh well.
Just like, oh yeah. Yeah.
Would be nice.
Yeah. So, and I think more and more we're getting that confidence as kind of the younger generations anyway growing up, because we're learning that from the kind of the Western society too, to speak up. And there's nothing wrong with speaking up and going to management and being like, this mosque is for us because we are one community. And I think, it's not a big deal if you add this. It's not a big deal if you bring this. And if you can't bring this, hold on a minute. I can speak to someone that might be able to bring this. But it's working in that collective. And something I mentioned earlier was most people are open-minded, but most people aren't even approached. Or most people don't have that light bulb moment or don't think about it because it doesn't affect them.
Exactly.
So it is sometimes just about being proactive and kind of addressing these problems. And I think in your case as well is when you were kind of growing up with dyslexia, all it needed was someone to be proactive and be like, hold on, Mohammed, maybe we should get tested. Maybe we should test you for dyslexia. That would have helped you go through A-levels a lot easier, 100%. Go through GCSEs a lot easier. You didn't have to struggle throughout school. Alhamdulillah, your positive outlook throughout university and now your career has really shaped who you are. But it doesn't need to be like that for everyone else. It's just being that proactive of, there's something wrong, let's acknowledge it. Let's not ignore wrong, or let's not ignore something that looks a bit off. And that kind of goes under the umbrella term disability and special needs in general. For looking out for one another is don't ignore something that looks off. Acknowledge it, and most people don't mind a conversation, I think. I think that's one thing that I've learned from this shows. Most people don't mind you coming up to them and asking you, is everything okay? Have you thought about doing this? Have you thought about being checked?
Yeah, and I think those conversations with the people who are maybe the decision makers in the places that we want to change, the tone always needs to be one of curiosity, rather than one of demand. Like, yes, we can demand, but the way that we do it can either create a negative sort of vibe or a positive one. So let's say you wanted to create more British Sign Language in one of the mosques. You can go up to one of the organizers and be like, we need to put more British Sign Language. Da, 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 da. Or you can say, I'm just curious, like, do we know if there's anybody here who like is hard of hearing? Like,
Hmm.
do people come to the mosque who are hard of hearing? And if so, like, how would they listen to the lecture? And they'd kind of go, oh, never thought about that. Then you can be like, oh, well, I remember going to this event actually once and it was amazing. They had somebody on a green screen just there
Yeah,
doing British Sign Language live. And they'd be like, oh, we could do that. And like, you let them come up with the idea rather than shove
yeah,
it down their throat. So it's just those little tweaks can sometimes really, really make a big difference in getting things done. Of course, if you do that like 5 times and still nothing happens, then there needs to be a bit more pressure. But
yeah.
yeah, I think it's important that we approach these conversations with the beauty of Islam embedded within it, rather than just like be like demanding and
Yeah,
you know.
for sure. And inshallah we see that change in our lifetimes. And if not in our lifetime, then inshallah in the future. But I genuinely believe it's just a conversation. All it requires is just a conversation, and there's so many people that would benefit from just that conversation. Something small to us is really big in other people's lives.
Yeah,
Um, and it's just going that extra mile sometimes.
100%. And I think it touched that one last thing you mentioned, where like most people don't mind like talking about their disability, and the reality is like that's the name of the show, right? Like most of these people are out of sight,
Hmm.
and what do they say? Out of sight,
Out of mind.
out of mind. So for all the people who are running the show for our communities, who these people aren't in their mind,
Hmm.
is because they're out of sight. And unless us as a collective, as a community, shine a light upon these cases, if we don't do that, we'll never get them in the minds of the people who can make these decisions. So
Yeah.
our responsibility is to shine that light, and then we can take them from being out of sight into being in sight. And then when they're in sight, they're in mind.
Inshallah, inshallah, and inshallah, we get to that point. Unfortunately, we are coming to an end to this program, but I did want to ask you just kind of your parting advice, or your last kind of nuggets of knowledge for our listeners and our viewers. If you can just let us know something, 2 minutes, just leave us with something magical, even though you've left us with very, very inspiring things.
Um,
Sorry to put you on the spot
no,
there.
it's fine. It's fine. I guess I'd wanna just look down the barrel of the camera for this one, because I'm just gonna talk to like the person who's watching this, who knows they're dyslexic and actually thinks they're dyslexic. Trust me, I know how it feels to feel like reading isn't your thing. You can't read. It's hard. There's so much things that you just get wrong, and that you're not good at. I completely understand, but I really want you to dig deep and think about where you are in your life, and think about all the things that you find so effortless that you do, that people find so difficult to do. All the ability to problem solve, the way you think about the world. Maybe you're creative. Maybe you like to write poetry. Think about all the things that you're good at. Trust me, just start shifting your focus away from all that stuff that you're negative, that negative self-talk. Shift it towards the stuff that you're really, really good at. The more you do that, the more you're going to find these nuggets and gems in who you are, that this dyslexia has instilled in you as a person, that you can really run with and make a massive, massive difference to your own life with. So I'm telling you, dyslexia is a superpower. The most intelligent, bright people who've changed society have been dyslexic. We have Einstein, who's been dyslexic. Richard Branson was dyslexic, the person who started Virgin and Virgin Galactic. Muhammad Ali was dyslexic. We have real people in our societies who've been dyslexic, who've changed their world. That means that you can change your world too. So don't allow this thought of dyslexia to be a cloud. If anything, it's the sunshine that can brighten up your day.
Thank you very, very, very much. This has been an incredibly inspiring conversation, and I really do hope that the viewers and listeners have benefited a lot from this, because it's actually been so beneficial for me as a person, just listening to all of this and listening to your story and your outlook and your mindset. And it really is the mindset of, I have the potential, I am capable, I'm going to go out there and do it. And I think it's so important, especially for individuals that are, like you said, out of sight, and are kind of neurodivergent, or who may have been pressured by other individuals to think they're not of potential. So inshallah, we've been able to benefit and gain something out of this conversation. Thank you very
Inshallah.
much for coming onto the show.
Thank you for
And
having
I'm
me.
really, really happy to have had you here today. And inshallah, we'll see the viewers and the listeners on the next episode of Our Site next Saturday, inshallah. Ma'a salama.